Have you ever heard a piece of music that feels, I don't know, both a little introspective, maybe sad, but also kind of hopeful?
Yeah, that feeling, that interesting mix.
Exactly. That might just be what we're diving into today.
It very well could be. Today we're looking at the Dorian mode. It's a musical scale with a really long history.
Right, centuries old. And it has this sound that musicians just keep coming back to, doesn't it? Across all sorts of genres.
It really does. And you, our listeners, you sent in a fantastic pile of sources on it. Articles, some analysis, maybe even some of your own music playing around with it.
Yeah, great stuff. So our mission here is to unpack all that, synthesize it, and pull out the really key insights, give you a shortcut to understanding what makes this scale so unique.
Exactly. We'll get into what Dorian actually is, structure-wise.
Okay.
Then trace its journey, from ancient Greece through the medieval period, Renaissance, right up to how we think of it now.
And its sound.
Yeah.
We need to talk about that unique sound.
Oh, absolutely. We'll dissect that bright minor quality and then look at how it pops up everywhere. Old folk tunes, modern pop, jazz, film scores. It's surprisingly versatile.
Okay, great. So fundamentals first. Structurally, what is the Dorian mode?
Okay, so basically it's a 7-note scale, like major or minor, but it's defined by a very specific pattern of whole and half step.
Right, the WHWWHW pattern.
That's the one. Whole, half, whole, half, whole, going up from the root.
And it's where those half steps fall that gives it its character.
Exactly. It creates this subtle kind of contour, a unique melodic feel.
So if we think about it in terms of intervals from the root note, what are we hearing?
Okay, so from the root, you've got root, major second, then a minor third.
Okay, so that's the minor part kicking in.
Right, then perfect fourth, perfect fifth,
Yeah.
then a major sixth.
Ah, the major sixth. We'll come back to that one, I bet.
Definitely. And finally, a minor seventh.
Can you give us a quick example, like starting on C?
Sure. C Dorian would be C, D, E flat.
Minor third.
Yep. Then F, G, A natural.
Major sixth.
Right. And B flat for the minor seventh. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B.
Got it. Now, a lot of the material you sent in mentioned how Dorian relates to the major scale. How does that work? Why is that connection important?
It's super important for how we understand it today, basically. Dorian is technically the second mode of the major scale. The major scale itself is also called the Ionian mode, right? It's mode number 1.
Okay, second mode. So what does that mean practically?
Think of it like this. Take a familiar major scale, say C major.
C, E, F, G, A, B, C.
Right. Now, just play those exact same notes, but start and end on the second note, which is D.
So D, F, G, A, B, C.
Yeah.
And then D again.
Exactly. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. That is D Dorian.
Huh. So it's the same set of notes as C major, just shifted.
Precisely. Same pitches, but changing the starting point, the tonal center, gives it that completely different characteristic Dorian sound.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, about that major sixth you mentioned.
Yeah.
The sources really hammered home that this is the crucial interval. Why?
Yeah, it absolutely is. That major sixth is like the sonic fingerprint of Dorian. It's the main reason we get that bright minor description people use.
The bright minor thing.
And the best way to really hear its effect is to compare Dorian directly to the natural minor scale. The Aeolian mode.
Okay, so what's the key difference there between Dorian and natural minor?
It's literally just one note. The 6th degree, Dorian has that major sixth. Natural minor or Aeolian has a minor sixth.
Just one note difference.
Just one semitone difference. Let's use C again. C Dorian, we said, is C, D, E, E, F, G, A, B.
Right, with A natural.
Yeah. Now, C natural minor is C, D, E, A, B, A, B, C. A natural in Dorian, a flat in natural minor. Everything else is the same.
Wow. It seems like such a tiny change, but it makes a big difference to the ear, doesn't it?
A huge difference. That one semitone is what creates that blend. One source called it moody minor vibes with a surprising touch of brightness.
I like that description.
Yeah, it just lifts Dorian a bit, stops it from sounding quite as dark or melancholic as natural minor can sometimes be.
And just quickly, how does it stack up against the regular major scale if you start on the same note, like C Dorian versus C major?
Good question. Compared to C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C Dorian, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, A, has a flatted third, that E flat, and a flatted seventh, the B flat.
Right. So those flats are what give it the overall minor quality compared to major.
Exactly. Those are the key differences, setting it apart from the straight major sound.
Some of the sources had tables showing these intervals side by side. I found those really helpful.
Yeah, visual aids are great for this. They really highlight how Dorian shares the minor third with Aeolian, but crucially differs on that sixth. And they clarify how it's distinct from Ionian or major with that minor third and seventh.
Okay, the name itself, Dorian. It sounds pretty old. Where does it come from?
It really does sound ancient, doesn't it? And it is. It traces back to ancient Greece, specifically associated with one of the Greek peoples, the Dorians.
Okay.
But, and this is important, their concept of Dorian, they called it Dorian harmonia, was much broader than just the scale like we think of it.
Broader how?
Well, it included the scale structure, yes, but also typical melodic shapes, how instruments were tuned, the whole style, and even the ethical character they believed the music had.
Whoa, ethical character. Like music could be good or bad.
Kind of. They had this concept called ethos. They genuinely believed different musical modes or harmonii could actually shape a person's character and emotions.
Seriously.
Yeah. The Dorian harmonia was considered really virtuous, associated with strength, dignity, courage, manliness, that sort of thing. Plato even wrote about it in the Republic, saying it was good for educating citizens because it fostered order and bravery.
That's wild. So like they'd use specific music to make soldiers brave?
That was the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Certain modes for certain effects.
Sure.
And Dorian was seen as the strong, stable one.
So it wasn't just about the notes then?
Not at all. And interestingly, the Greek Dorian structure was often thought of as descending, like 2 4-note groups, tetrachords going down, maybe EDCB, then AGFE, so different from our ascending scale.
Descending? And would it have sounded exactly like our Dorian?
Probably not quite. Greek music might have used microtones intervals smaller than our half steps. The exact flavor would be different. But the name and that core idea of a specific structure with a specific character, that started there.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's jump ahead. Medieval times. How did Dorian get picked up then?
Right, so fast forward a few centuries. The system of medieval church modes, used for Gregorian chant and early polyphony, took names from the Old Greek modes, including Dorian.
Ah, so they borrowed the names. Was it influenced by anything else?
Yeah, heavily influenced by the Byzantine Church's 8-mode system, the octuchos. Western theorists from around the 9th century on adapted these ideas. But again, it wasn't a direct copy of the Greek system. The medieval understanding was different.
So what was the medieval Dorian mode like?
Typically, it was defined as the scale from D to D, using just the natural notes, what we think of as the white keys on a piano.
D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D.
Exactly. That was mode 1, the first authentic mode. There was also a related plagal mode, Hypodorian, same notes basically, but a lower range, usually A to A, still centered on D though.
Okay. And I remember reading something about accidentals, notes that weren't strictly in the mode.
Yes, musica ficta, literally feigned music. This was super important. Performers would add sharps or flats that weren't written in the score.
Why would they do that?
For a few reasons. Sometimes to avoid awkward intervals, like the tritone, the augmented fourth. Sometimes just to make melodies flow better. And very often to create a stronger sense of arrival at the end of a phrase, like raising the 7th note to lead into the final note.
So how did musica ficta affect Dorian?
Well, in D Dorian, the B is naturally a B natural. But singers would often sing B flat, especially going downwards or maybe to avoid a tritone with F. And the C, the 7th note, was very frequently raised to C sharp right before landing on the final D at a cadence.
Ah, creating that leading tone pulled to the D.
Precisely. So even though it was a defined mode, there was this inherent flexibility. It wasn't rigidly fixed.
Right. Moving into the Renaissance, we had theorists like Tinctoris and Zarlino looking at this stuff. What was their take?
Yeah, the Renaissance was big for music theory. They were trying to codify everything, make sense of polyphony music with multiple voices, and connect it back to classical ideas. Tinctoris wrote one of the first big treatises trying to apply modal theory systematically to polyphony.
And Zarlino. He seems like a key figure.
Hugely influential. Giuseppe Zarlino, in his book Le Istituzioni Harmoniche, I mean, that was massive. He really tried to define what a mode was in the context of Renaissance music. He called it a kind of measure or form that gives music order.
Did he also talk about the ethos, the character of the modes?
He did, yeah. He drew on those ancient Greek ideas. He described Dorian specifically as serious and thought it was especially good for religious or solemn music.
Interesting. So how is Dorian actually used in complex Renaissance music, like by Palestrina?
Composers like Palestrina used Dorian quite a lot, often based on D, but sometimes G or A as the final note. The mode provided the framework, the characteristic intervals and melodic shapes that they'd weave into their intricate polyphonic textures. It was a really sophisticated application of modal principles.
Okay, fast forward again. Baroque era. This is when major and minor keys really take over, right? What happens to Dorian then?
You're right, the Baroque is all about the rise of major-minor tonality, but the modes didn't just, disappear overnight. They kind of coexisted for a while and definitely influenced the new system.
How so? You mentioned Bach earlier.
Bach is a great example. His famous Toccata and Fugue in D minor for organ, BWV 538. It's often nicknamed the Dorian Toccata.
Why Dorian? Does it sound Dorian?
Well, the key signature has no sharps or flats, which is the old way of writing D Dorian, but the music itself uses B flats all over the place as accidentals. So honestly, it sounds much more like D minor or D Aeolian.
Oh, okay. So the signature was kind of a holdover.
Pretty much. It was common in the Baroque to use those Dorian signatures, no sharps flats for D minor, one flat for G minor, etc., even when the music was functioning tonally as minor. A bit of a historical quirk.
But did Bach use actual Dorian melodies too?
He did. His cantata BWV4, Christlag and Todsbanden, is based on an old Lutheran chorale melody that is in D Dorian. And even though Bach harmonizes it within a tonal framework, you can still really hear the modal flavor of that original tune shining through. It shows how they integrated modal stuff into the newer tonal language.
What about the big theorists then, like Rameau? Were they still talking about modes?
Rameau, in his treatise on harmony, was really focused on nailing down the rules of major-minor tonality, functional harmony, root movements, that kind of thing. He wasn't as focused on modes, but the minor key itself, as it developed in the Baroque, kind of absorbed elements from the older minor modes, including Dorian, like the flexible 6th and 7th degrees you get in the melodic minor scale. Raising them going up, lowering them coming down. That flexibility echoes how the 6th in medieval Dorian could sometimes be B natural, sometimes B flat, and how the 7th was often raised at cadences. So bits of Dorian's flexibility sort of got baked into the standard minor key.
Okay, so let's pull it all together. How do we define and think about Dorian today? What's the modern conception?
Today, it's much more standardized. We define Dorian strictly as that 7-note scale with the specific pattern. Whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole.
Right. And the intervals: root, major 2nd, minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, major 6th, minor 7th.
Exactly. That formula is key. And the two main ways we conceptualize it now are, one, as the second mode of the major scale.
Like D Dorian being related to C major.
Right. And two, maybe more intuitively for the sound, as a natural minor scale but with a raised 6th degree.
Natural minor with a major 6th instead of a minor 6th.
Precisely. That flexible 6th from medieval times has pretty much solidified into the major 6th in the modern definition, probably because that's what gives Dorian its most unique and appealing sound compared to regular minor.
Okay, we've got the structure, we've got the history. Let's really dig into the sound now. The feel, the character. What makes Dorian sound like Dorian?
It's all about that unique emotional quality, isn't it? It's not just straightforward, happy, like major, or purely sad, like minor. It occupies this really interesting middle ground.
Yeah, the sources you sent used some great words to describe it. What were some that jumped out?
Oh, lots. Bittersweet melancholy with a twist of hope was one I liked.
Yeah, that's good.
Others said darkness with a hint of light, or mysterious, introspective but doesn't wallow.
Doesn't wallow. Interesting.
Yeah, or soulful without being heavy, slightly sad but very hopeful. Some described it as grounded and cool with an uplifting quality, even whispering mystery, introspection, and a bit of ancient mysticism.
That's quite a range. So what is it in the notes that creates this ambiguity?
It really boils down to that interplay between the minor 3rd and the major 6th. The minor 3rd gives it its basic minor key feel, right? Connects it to sadness or introspection.
Okay.
But then, bam, comes that major 6th. And that injects the brightness, the lift, the hint of light.
So it's like minor, but with a little optimism baked in.
Kinda, yeah. It creates this emotional sweet spot, someone called it, a dualistic sound. That major 6th just feels, I don't know, less severe, less heavy than the minor 6th you find in natural minor. It adds intrigue.
It stops it from being just one thing.
Exactly. It lets Dorian, as one source put it, vibe in its own lane. Not quite major, not quite minor.
Did any composers or musicologists comment on this specific quality?
Oh, yeah. Matt Keenan, a composer, summed it up neatly as darkness with a hint of light.
Simple but effective.
And Thomas Newman, the film composer who used C Dorian a lot in American Beauty.
Oh, boy, that score.
Yeah, he said he was aiming for mysterious depth and an emotive, bittersweet weight. And there was even a study mentioned that showed just changing that one interval, the 6th, between Dorian and Aeolian, is enough to shift how people perceive the emotion. Dorian was rated as having both elevating major qualities and depressing minor qualities.
Wow. So the science backs up the feeling. It's inherently ambiguous.
It seems so, which
Yeah.
is part of its power, right? And it's fascinating how the ethos has shifted, too. Ancient Greeks heard strength and courage. Zarlino in the Renaissance heard seriousness. We hear this more nuanced, bittersweet, mysterious thing.
So perception changes with culture and style.
Definitely. But the potential is there in the notes, that major sixth clashing gently with the minor third.
Okay, so let's talk practicalities. How does this structure translate into harmony? What kinds of chords do you build in Dorian?
Right, so because the third is minor, the basic chord on the tonic, the home chord, is a minor triad. In D Dorian, that's a D minor chord, DFA.
Okay, standard minor triad.
But a really distinctive feature comes with the chord built on the fourth degree of the scale.
The fourth degree. In D Dorian, that's G.
Exactly. And if you build a triad on G using only notes from D Dorian, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, you get GBD.
GBD, that's a G major chord.
Bingo, a major four chord. This is a big deal because in natural minor, the Ive chord is minor, like G minor and D natural minor. That major four chord in Dorian is a key part of the bright minor sound because its major third, the B natural, is actually the Dorian mode's characteristic major sixth relative to the tonic D.
Ah, so the harmony reinforces that bright spot.
Totally. You hear that IIV progression, minor tonic to major subdominant, a lot in Dorian music. It's very characteristic.
What other kinds of chords are common?
Well, besides the minor tonic I and the major IV, you often get minor seventh chords like DM7 in D Dorian, minor sixth chords, DM6, DFAB, that one really highlights the minor third and major sixth together, minor 69 chords, and other extensions like minor 9, 11, 13, all drawing on the notes of the scale.
You mentioned a specific jazz voicing earlier, the so what chord.
Ah, yes, the so wet voicing. Famous from the Miles Davis track, it's built by pianist Bill Evans. It's a great example of chordal harmony chords built in fourths, not thirds.
Fourths. How does that work in D Dorian?
The typical voicing is DGCFA, played low on the bass and then higher on piano. It's essentially a D minor 11th chord, DM11. It sounds very open, spacious, kind of floaty. It was a move away from traditional chord structures and became iconic for modal jazz, really capturing that Dorian harmonic feel.
So what are some common chord progressions you might hear?
Well, that IIV is huge, as we said.
Wow.
DM to G in D Dorian, or AM to D in A Dorian. Thomas Newman uses that constantly in American Beauty.
Right.
You might also hear things like, say, in A Dorian, MCGD. That progression also brings out the flavor, especially that D major chord highlighting the F sharp, which is the major sixth of a Dorian.
Does it resolve strongly like in major minor keys?
Often, not really. Dorian harmony tends to feel more horizontal, static, floating, maybe. The focus is more on soaking in the color of the mode rather than driving towards a strong VI cadence like in tonal music. Though, historically, remember that raised C sharp at cadences in medieval Dorian, that was creating a stronger pull, but modern modal stuff often avoids that.
Okay, how about melody and improvisation? Especially in jazz.
Dorian is absolutely huge for jazz improv, especially over minor seventh chords and minor sixth chords, too. A big reason is it's considered to have no real avoid notes.
Avoid notes.
Yeah, notes in a scale that clash harshly against the underlying chord and usually need careful handling. With Dorian over a standard minor seventh chord, all the notes generally sound pretty consonant or pleasingly colorful. This gives improvisers a ton of freedom.
So what do jazz players actually do when improvising in Dorian?
They often really lean into that major sixth. Playing it against the minor third and minor seventh really spells out the Dorian sound. They'll use scale patterns, obviously, arpeggiate the key chords like the minor tonic or the major 5E chord. They'll use little melodic figures that highlight the Dorian intervals. Sometimes they'll blend it with pentatonic scales, and often they'll target specific notes like the root, the fourth, and especially that major sixth to really nail the modal character.
Sounds like a really useful and expressive tool for improvisers.
Oh, incredibly versatile. It lets you stay in that minor zone, but with that unique twist of brightness.
Right.
Really flexible.
Now, the sources also mentioned some variations on Dorian, different flavors almost.
Yeah, that's right. While standard Dorian is the main one, there are a couple of interesting twists you sometimes encounter. One is often called Dorian sharp 4.
Dorian #4, what else is it called?
Sometimes Ukrainian Dorian or altered Dorian or even Lydian minor, because that raised fourth gives it a Lydianish tinge.
So, standard Dorian, but with a raised fourth. What's the formula?
It's 1, 2, re 3, 3 tech 4, 5, 6, or A7. So, root, major second, minor third, augmented fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, minor seventh.
Where does it come from?
Interestingly, it's the fourth mode of the harmonic minor scale. If you take a harmonic minor, A, B, C, E, F, G, shag, and start on the fourth note, D, you get D, E, F, G, shag, A, D, C. That's D Dorian #4.
What does that augmented fourth sound like? What character does it give?
It sounds mystical, exotic.
Yeah.
It definitely adds tension. That Lydian comparison is apt. It has that slightly brighter, more searching quality because of the #4, but still within that Dorian minor major sixth framework.
Where would you hear Dorian #4?
Modal jazz sometimes, maybe over a minor IIV or just on a minor chord for more out there sound. Fusion, prog rock definitely use it. Film scores too, for that kind of exotic or mysterious color.
Okay, what's another common variation?
Another important one is Dorian flat 2.
Dorian Re2. Other names for that one.
Sometimes Phrygian natural 6 or Phrygian #6 because it's like the Phrygian mode, which has a Re2, but with Dorian's natural major sixth. Also sometimes called the Assyrian mode.
So standard Dorian with a lowered second degree.
Exactly. The formula is 1 Erie 2, Hey 3 4 5 6 3 7, root, minor second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, minor seventh.
And where does this one come from?
This is the second mode of the melodic minor scale, the ascending version. Take C, melodic minor ascending, C, D, E, 3, F, G, A, B. Start on the second note, D, you get D, E, U, F, G, A, B, C. That's D, Dorian, A2.
What's the feel of this one with a flat 2?
That minor second gives it a very different flavor, often described as Spanish or Middle Eastern sounding. It's got quite a bit of tension right at the start, but still keeps that Dorian major sixth later on. Very evocative.
Where is Dorianid 2 used?
You hear it in jazz, sometimes over suspended dominant chords, like a G7 Sus 9 chord maybe, or just over minor triads or sus chords to get that specific exotic color.
It's amazing how changing just one note creates a whole different world of sound.
Isn't it? It shows how much potential there is within these modal structures. And it kind of connects back to that historical flexibility, right? Medieval Dorian wasn't always rigidly fixed on that sixth degree. These variations are like modern explorations of that same principle.
Okay, let's zoom out again. Where do we actually hear Dorian in action? Across different genres, different eras. Let's start with folk music.
Dorian is huge in folk music, especially Celtic traditions, Irish, Scottish, and English folk music too. That slightly melancholic but strong character fits so well with ballads and old tunes.
Any famous examples?
Scarborough Fair is the classic one, often cited as being in a Dorian. The melody really leans on the key Dorian notes, tonic, minor third, major sixth, minor seventh. And harmonically, you often get that minor tonic to major 5E chord progression.
Yeah.
Just sounds ancient and poignant, right?
Totally. Any others?
Drunken Sailor is another famous one, often put in the Dorian camp, though maybe a bit more rough and ready. And just generally countless Irish jigs, reels, airs. Dorian is just part of the DNA of that music.
Okay, how about jazz? We touched on modal jazz.
Yeah, it's absolutely fundamental there. Post-bebop, it became a cornerstone. That suitability for improvising over minor seventh and minor sixth chords, the no avoid notes thing, was revolutionary.
And so what is the prime example?
The absolute archetype, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. The A sections are D Dorian. The B section, the bridge, shifts up to E flat Dorian. Simple structure, but profound. And that, so what, chord voicing we talked about?
Coltrane too, right?
Yep, John Coltrane's Impressions uses the exact same D Dorian, E flat Dorian structure. And loads of other tunes. Milestones, the later Miles Davis one, Freddie Hubbard's Little Sunflower, Coltrane's Mr. PC, Equinox, Oliver Nelson's Stolen Moments, Wayne Shorter's Footprints, Joe Henderson's Record of Me, Jobim's Wave. The list goes on. Dorian is just everywhere in that modal jazz sound.
Moving into rock and pop. Do we hear it there? It feels like major and minor dominate.
They do dominate, but Dorian definitely pops up more than you might think. It adds nuance, a different flavor. Think Michael Jackson Thriller has Dorian sections. Billie Jean uses a Dorian-esque bass line.
Really? MJ?
Yeah. The Beatles used it. Don't Bother Me is often cited. Pink Floyd, Radiohead Karma Police has that Dorian feel in the verse chords.
Ah, Karma Police. I can hear that now.
Linkin Park's Burning in the Skies actually contrasts a Dorian verse with an Aeolian natural minor chorus, which is cool. Daft Punk's Get Lucky has a strong Dorian vibe in the verse progression.
Yeah, Lucky, yeah.
Lizzo's About Damn Time, Tears for Fears, Mad World, Chris Isaak's Wicked Game.
Wicked Game, definitely. Sultry.
Exactly. Imagine Dragon's Radioactive, Oasis' Supersonic, Bruno Mars's Uptown Funk in the verse per chorus, Van Morrison's Moondance, even Hendrix's Foxy Lady riff has a Dorian connection. Yes, Owner of a Lonely Heart, Lauryn Hill's Doo-Wop, that thing. Stevie Wonder's I Wish. In a lot of these, that major sixth is emphasized somewhere, melodically or harmonically, giving it away.
Wow, okay, it's more widespread in pop and rock than I realized. What about classical music beyond the early stuff?
Well, we covered the Renaissance and Baroque structural basis, then coexistence. In the Romantic era, composers sometimes used it for effect, like creating an archaic feel or a folk-like or exotic atmosphere. Beethoven used it in his Missa Solemnis. Saint-Saëns used it in Carnival of the Animals for the Royal March of the Lions to sound Persian, and wrote other pieces explicitly in Dorian.
So more for specific color back then.
Often, yeah. But then in the 20th and 21st centuries, there was a real revival of interest in modality. Sibelius's Symphony No. 6 is largely in D Dorian. He wanted a pure, almost Palestrina-like sound.
Sibelius. Understood.
And Bela Bartok used modes constantly, inspired by his folk music research. He has pieces in his Microcosmos piano collection explicitly titled In Dorian Mode.
Right, Bartok makes sense.
And others too. Debussy, Holst, Vaughan Williams, Kodaly, Messiaen, the Ukrainian composer Lysenko. Lots of modern composers explore Dorian's expressive potential beyond just major and minor.
And lastly, film and game score. You mentioned American Beauty.
Absolutely. Its ambiguity is perfect for creating atmosphere. Newman's American Beauty score is Exhibit A C Dorian mostly. That pulsing piano ostinato in Dead Already with the E-flat F major sounds, that's highlighting the minor third and major sixth right there, the simple I-IV harmony. It creates that mysterious, anxious, bittersweet feeling of the film.
It really does define that film sound.
Totally. And in games, Koji Kondo's Song of Storms from Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, super catchy, instantly recognizable, slightly melancholic, but also kind of whimsical folk tune. Pure Dorian goodness.
It's amazing how versatile it is. Folk tunes, jazz epics, pop hits, symphonies, game music.
It really is. That unique sound just keeps finding new applications, new ways to resonate. It speaks to something enduring in that structure.
So let's try to wrap this up. Quick recap. Key characteristics of Dorian.
Okay, number one, that distinctive bright minor sound comes from having a minor third but a major sixth.
Right, the defining feature.
Number two, its long and varied history, from Greek concepts through medieval modes to its modern use.
Got it.
And number three, its incredible versatility across pretty much every genre imaginable.
So for someone listening, a composer, musician, or just a music fan, what's the takeaway? Why does understanding Dorian matter?
Well, for composers, it's another color on the palette, right? A way to create different moods beyond basic major-minor. Offers interesting variations, too.
For performers.
Especially improvisers, it's a super useful framework, very flexible, sounds great over common minor chords.
And for listeners.
Just a deeper appreciation, maybe. Hearing those nuances, understanding why something sounds bittersweet or mysterious, it adds another layer to listening. Gives you context beyond just major or minor.
Definitely. So as we finish this deep dive, here's something to think about.
Yeah.
Why has Dorian lasted? Is it just that perfect balance, that spot between minor moodiness and major lift?
It's a great question. Does it hit some kind of universal emotional sweet spot?
Maybe. And are there other modes, other scales out there with their own unique sweet spots that we maybe haven't explored as much or could rediscover?
Definitely food for thought. Maybe go back and listen to some of those examples we mentioned, see if you can really pinpoint that Dorian sound, or even try playing it yourself on an instrument if you have one.
Yeah, give it a try.
And seriously, thanks to everyone who sent in sources. This was a fascinating dive. Really appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely. Keep sending us your musical questions, those things you want to understand better. We love exploring them.